She had always been the forgotten one of the court, the girl without a fortune, the one who dreamed of a prince, who smiled at everyone, but truly saw no one. For years, she believed she was chasing an impossible fairy tale, until the day she thought she would finally be kissed by him. But the kiss did not come from the prince. It came from his older brother, the battle-scarred Alpha, who'd always watched her from the shadows, the warrior who'd always saved her and protected her in silence. But the prince did not accept it. Now 2 heirs are fighting over a woman the entire kingdom once overlooked, and she still does not know the most shocking truth of all. The Alpha, the one who never let anyone close, made a choice that shook the entire court and awakened a power within her that would set the kingdom ablaze. She had always been the forgotten one of the court, the girl without a fortune, the one who dreamed of a prince who smiled at everyone, but truly saw no one. Susan had spent 23 years living in the margins of court life, a noblewoman in name only. Orphaned at 7, she became a ward of the late king's mercy, a promise made to her dying father on a battlefield far away. The court tolerated her presence, but never embraced it. She was the girl with flame-red hair who served wine at banquets and embroidered in corners, invisible to those who mattered. For years, she believed she was chasing an impossible fairy tale. Prince Callum, with his golden charm and easy laughter, became her secret obsession. She wrote his name in the margins of her letters. She memorized the way he moved through a room. She convinced herself that one day he would look at her and see something worth loving, until the day she thought she would finally be kissed by him. Lady Vivian orchestrated the game in the moonlit garden, a courtly entertainment involving blindfolds and whispered promises. When Susan was chosen, her heart nearly stopped. This was her moment, her fairy tale coming true. But the kiss did not come from the prince. When lips met hers in the darkness, the world shattered and reformed. The kiss was fierce, consuming, devastating in its intensity. It tasted of storms and steel and something wild she couldn't name. Her entire body ignited with a recognition she didn't understand. It came from his older brother, the battle-scarred Alpha who had always watched her from the shadows. Richard, the heir who returned from war with scars on his face and ice in his eyes. The warrior who spoke little and smiled less. The man they called the beast of the borderlands, who terrified enemies and courtiers alike. The warrior who had always saved her and protected her in silence. Every cruel word spoken against her that mysteriously ceased. Every dangerous situation she'd escaped without knowing why. Every moment she'd felt inexplicably safe in a court that showed her no kindness. It had been him. Always him. Watching. Waiting. Protecting the one thing he believed he could never have. But the prince did not accept it. Callum, sensing his brother's jealousy for the first time in his pampered life, began pursuing Susan with sudden fervor. Not out of love, but out of spite. Not because he wanted her, but because Richard did. The game between brothers turned deadly, and Susan found herself the prize in a contest she never asked to enter. Now 2 heirs are fighting over a woman the entire kingdom once overlooked. The court watched in scandal and fascination as the invisible girl became the center of the most dangerous rivalry in the realm. Whispers followed her through every corridor. Lady Vivian's hatred turned murderous, And Susan, caught between the fantasy she'd clung to and the terrifying reality of what she felt for Richard, had to make an impossible choice. And she still does not know the most shocking truth of all. Buried in her bloodline, dormant for generations, lies the power of the phoenix. Ancient magic that will ignite when her heart finally breaks open. The power that makes her not just a pawn in the brothers' game, but the most dangerous piece on the board. The Alpha, the one who never let anyone close, made a choice that shook the entire court. At the royal ascension, before the assembled kingdom, Richard did the unthinkable. He claimed her, not as a secret, not in shadows, but in front of everyone who had ever dismissed her, ever overlooked her, ever believed she was nothing. And when the assassins struck and chaos erupted, Susan's terror transformed into something else entirely. Flames that didn't burn him. Fire that consumed their enemies. The phoenix rising from the ashes of who she thought she was. The forgotten girl became the queen. The kingdom never knew it needed. And the love story everyone believed was impossible became the legend that would reshape their world forever. Chapter 1. The letter slipped from Susan's pocket during the morning assembly, a piece of folded parchment that tumbled across the marble floor like a leaf caught in an ill wind. She didn't notice it fall. She was too busy trying to make herself invisible among the other ladies in waiting, her copper hair tucked beneath a modest veil, her eyes fixed on the middle distance where nothing and no one could hurt her. Lady Vivian noticed. She always noticed. Like a hawk circling wounded prey, Vivian had made sport of Susan's vulnerabilities for years. The beautiful noblewoman bent gracefully, her silk skirts whispering against stone, and plucked the letter from the floor. Susan's heart stopped when she recognized the broken seal, the careful script she'd written by candlelight the night before. "My dearest Mamma," Vivian read aloud, her voice carrying through the sudden silence of the hall. "Today marks 16 years since you left me. I still talk to you sometimes, though I know you cannot hear. I wonder if you would be proud of the woman I've become, or disappointed that I am still so alone." Laughter rippled through the assembled courtiers. Susan felt her face burn, felt the familiar sting of tears she refused to let fall. She'd learned long ago that tears only made the cruelty sharper. "How tragic," Vivian continued, her smile poisonous and perfect. "The orphan girl still writes to ghosts. Tell me, Susan, does your dead mother write back? Or is she as silent as every suitor who's ever—" "That's enough." The voice cut through the hall like a blade through silk. Deep, commanding, absolute. Richard stood in the doorway, still dressed in riding leathers from the morning patrol, his long dark hair pulled back to reveal the scar that ran from temple to jaw. The court fell silent. Even Vivian's cruel smile faltered. He crossed the hall in measured strides, his boots echoing in the sudden quiet. Susan couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but watch as the Alpha, the man who terrified everyone, who had never spoken more than 3 words to her in all the years she'd lived here, reached past Vivian's manicured hand and took the letter. For a moment, just a moment, Richard looked at Vivian with an expression that made the beautiful woman take an involuntary step backward. Then he turned to Susan. His scarred hands were surprisingly gentle as he offered her the letter. Their eyes met. Susan saw something flicker in those storm-grey depths, something that looked almost like tenderness, almost like pain, but that was impossible. Richard was duty incarnate, obligation made flesh. He'd saved her because the late king had commanded it, because honor demanded it. Nothing more. She looked away first, taking the letter with trembling fingers, mumbling thanks to the marble floor between them. She never saw the way his jaw tightened, or how his hands curled into fists at his sides, or how he watched her hurry from the hall as if his entire world was disappearing through a doorway he could never follow her through. Duty, Susan told herself. It was only ever duty. Chapter 2. The garden game was Vivian's idea, of course. She announced it at dinner with the kind of gleeful malice that made Susan's stomach turn, though everyone else seemed enchanted by the prospect. A test of true love, Vivian called it. Partners would be chosen by lottery, then separated. The ladies would be blindfolded in the moonlit garden, and the gentlemen would find them for a single kiss, if the connection was real, if fate smiled upon them. They would recognize each other despite the darkness. Susan should have known better, should have recognized the trap. But when Callum caught her eye across the table and smiled, that devastating golden boy smile that had sustained her through countless lonely nights, she let herself hope. The garden was silver-washed and fragrant when they led her to the fountain. Silk blindfold cool against her heated skin. She heard footsteps retreating, heard whispered laughter fading into the night. Then, silence. Just the splash of water and her own racing heart. She waited, counting breaths, imagining Callum's gentle hands, his easy charm, the fairy tale finally coming true. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, heavier than she expected. She felt him before he touched her, a wall of heat at her back, the scent of leather and steel and something wild that made her pulse spike with an unfamiliar anxiety. This didn't feel like Callum. This felt dangerous. A scarred hand cupped her jaw, tilting her face upward with devastating gentleness. Then his lips met hers, and the world caught fire. It wasn't a courtly kiss. It wasn't gentle or practiced or safe. It was consuming, fierce, a claim and a question and a confession all at once. His other hand slid into her hair, scattering pins, angling her head so he could deepen the kiss. Susan gasped against his mouth, and he swallowed the sound, pressed closer, kissed her like a man starving, like a man dying, like a man who had waited far too long for something he believed he could never have. Her entire body ignited with recognition she couldn't name. This wasn't Callum. Couldn't be. Callum kissed like springtime. This was a winter storm, brutal and beautiful and utterly devastating. When he finally pulled away, she was shaking. He pressed his forehead to hers for just a heartbeat, his breath ragged against her lips. Then he was gone. Susan tore off the blindfold with trembling hands, searching the shadows. Nothing. Just moonlight and roses and the memory of a kiss that had rearranged something fundamental in her chest. When she returned to the terrace, Callum greeted her with a lazy smile. "Did you recognize me, sweet Susan?" She stared at him, at his unmarked hands, his easy posture, the complete absence of the intensity that had just shattered her world. Across the garden, half hidden in shadow, Richard stood with his jaw clenched and his hands gripping the stone balustrade hard enough to crack it. And Susan realized with dawning horror exactly what had happened, exactly who had kissed her. exactly whose taste still lingered on her lips like a brand. Chapter 3. Callum began appearing everywhere. In the library where Susan sought refuge among dusty histories, in the gardens where she walked at dawn to avoid the other courtiers, at meals where he suddenly insisted she sit near him, his golden head bent close to hers, his laughter ringing out at things she said that weren't remotely funny. It should have been everything she'd ever wanted. The prince, finally seeing her, finally choosing her, finally offering the fairy tale she'd written in her journal 1,000 times. Instead, it felt wrong. Susan caught herself comparing every interaction to that moment in the garden. Callum's touch was pleasant, but forgettable. The kiss in the darkness had been a brand. Callum's compliments were charming and empty. That other kiss had felt like a confession carved in blood and bone. She told herself she was being foolish, ungrateful. The prince was pursuing her, and she was mooning over a mystery that made no sense. Except, it did make sense. Her body knew what her mind refused to accept. "You seem distracted, sweet Susan," Callum murmured, tucking a strand of copper hair behind her ear. They were walking the rose garden, his arm linked through hers in a possessive display that had the entire court whispering, "Are you thinking of our kiss?" Our kiss. The lie sat between them like a blade. Yes, my lord." The words tasted like ash. His smile widened, but there was something sharp beneath it, something that had nothing to do with her. His gaze flickered past her shoulder, and Susan turned. Richard stood at the far end of the garden path, frozen in the act of retreat. Even at this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his scarred hands had curled into fists. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, his burning with something that looked like anguish, before he turned and strode away. "Poor Richard," Callum said lightly, watching his brother's departure. "He's been so tense lately. One would almost think something was bothering him." Susan's stomach dropped. She looked at the prince, really looked at him, and saw the calculation in his handsome face. The satisfaction, the cruel amusement of a boy who'd just discovered his older brother's weakness and intended to exploit it. "You don't actually," she started, then stopped. What was she asking? Whether he cared for her? She already knew the answer. "Don't I?" Callum's smile was dazzling and empty. He lifted her hand to his lips, his gaze never leaving hers. "You're lovely, Susan. So desperate to be chosen. So grateful for every scrap of attention. Why wouldn't I enjoy your company?" The cruelty of it stole her breath. She was a game piece, a way to needle his brother, nothing more. That night, alone in her small room, Susan pressed her fingers to her lips and remembered a different kiss. A real one. A devastating one. And wondered what it meant that the beast of the borderlands had kissed her like she was the only thing in the world worth saving. Chapter 4. Susan found him in the armory because she went looking for him. 3 days of Callum's hollow courtship had sharpened something inside her, turned confusion into fury, and she needed answers even if they destroyed her. Richard stood with his back to the door, inspecting a blade in the dim light filtering through narrow windows. He didn't turn when she entered, but his shoulders tensed in a way that told her he knew exactly who had invaded his sanctuary. "Why did you do it?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "In the garden. Why did you take his place?" The blade stilled in his hands. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he set the sword down and turned to face her. God, he was devastating. All that controlled power and barely leashed intensity. The scar cutting through his features somehow made him more compelling, more real than his perfect younger brother could ever be. You need to stay away from Callum. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in days. His interest in you isn't what you think. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters. He moved closer, and Susan held her ground even though every instinct screamed at her to either run or close the distance between them entirely. He's using you to provoke me. When he's bored with the game, he'll discard you. And you care about this because the question came out sharp, defensive. Because of some promise you made to my father? Because duty demands you protect the helpless orphan? Something flashed in his storm-grey eyes, something that looked like pain. You think this is duty? His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You think I've spent years watching you, protecting you, keeping every other man at a distance because of obligation. What else would it be? She was shaking now. Anger and confusion, and that terrible, consuming heat from the garden all tangled together. You've barely spoken to me in 5 years. You look through me like I'm made of glass. If not for duty, then what? Jealousy. You can't stand that your brother finally wants something. So you. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, backing her against the stone wall with a gentleness that belied the fury in his eyes. One scarred hand braced beside her head. The other cupped her face with devastating tenderness. You think I'm warning you out of duty? His thumb traced her jaw, her lips, and Susan's breath caught. You understand nothing. Then make me understand, she whispered. I can't. The words sounded torn from somewhere deep inside him. You dream of fairy tales and golden princes. I'm the monster they tell stories about. I have nothing to offer you but scars and silence and a love that would consume us both. The confession hung between them like a blade. Richard. But he was already pulling away. Already. Rebuilding the walls she'd just glimpsed behind. Stay away from Callum. Stay away from me, for both our sakes. Then he was gone, leaving Susan trembling against cold stone, his words echoing in the sudden silence, a love that would consume us both. Chapter 5. The hunting horn split the morning air, and Susan's mare danced sideways, already nervous. Lady Vivian rode close, too close, her smile sharp as cut glass as she leaned over to adjust Susan's saddle girth. Such a skittish creature, Vivian murmured, though whether she meant the horse or Susan herself remained unclear. Do try to keep up, darling. The horn sounded again. Vivian's whip cracked near the mare's flank, and suddenly Susan was flying. The world became a blur of trees and pounding hooves and her own ragged breathing. She hauled on the reins, but the bit had twisted, useless, and the forest opened up ahead into nothing but sky and the distant glitter of rocks far below. The cliff. She was going to die because of a jealous woman's petty cruelty, and her last thought would be of Richard's scarred hands and the confession he'd tried to take back. A thunder of hooves alongside her. Richard, riding like vengeance itself, his face a mask of controlled terror. He didn't call out, didn't waste breath on words. He simply drove his stallion alongside her bolting mare and launched himself from the saddle. His weight hit her like a storm, carrying them both clear as the mare plunged over the edge. They hit the ground hard, rolling, and Richard's body curved around hers, absorbing the impact of rocks and roots until they finally stopped at the base of an oak. Silence. Susan's ears rang. Every breath hurt. "Don't move." Richard's voice came rough against her hair. His arms were iron bands around her, trembling with something that wasn't exhaustion. "Are you hurt? Susan, answer me." I'm all right." She tried to shift and his grip tightened. "Richard, I can't breathe." He released her like she'd burned him, pulling back to run, shaking hands over her arms, her ribs, checking for breaks with a gentleness that made her throat ache. His face was white beneath the scar, his eyes wild. "You could have died." Each word sounded torn from him. I felt it, the wrongness of it, like something in my chest was being ripped out. "How did you know?" Susan caught his hands, stilling them. "You were half a field away. How did you know in time?" His jaw worked. Blood seeped from a cut on his temple where he'd struck something during their fall. "Because when Callum kissed you in that garden," he said finally, the words coming out broken, "it wasn't Callum. It was me." The forest held its breath. The mask. The darkness. I told myself it was to protect you from his games, but that was a lie. His storm-grey eyes met hers, naked with truth. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I've been dying every day since, watching you look at him the way I've dreamed you'd look at me. Susan's world tilted. "You. I know what you are to me, Susan. I've known since the moment you turned 18, and something in my soul recognized its mate." Chapter 6. Susan's hands were still caught in his, both of them bloodied and shaking. The confession hung between them like a drawn blade, and she couldn't breathe around the fury building in her chest. "You knew." Her voice came out deadly quiet. "All this time you knew, and you let me think. You let me believe." "Susan, you stood there 3 days ago and told me to stay away from Callum, from you. You said you had nothing to offer but scars and silence." She wrenched her hands free, shoving at his chest. "You broke my heart while I was falling for a ghost of you. A lie wearing your brother's face." Richard caught her wrists, gentle despite the violence in his eyes. "I was trying to protect you." "From what? The truth?" She was shaking harder now. Rage and revelation, and that treacherous heat from the garden all colliding. "From yourself? From this?" She pulled one hand free and pressed it to his chest, felt his heart hammering beneath her palm. "You're a coward, Richard Blackthorne. For all your scars and battlefields, you're terrified of this." Something snapped in his expression. "You want the truth? You want proof?" "Yes." The word came out like a challenge, like a plea. He moved with that same devastating speed from the garden, cupping her face with scarred hands, angling her mouth to his. But this time there was no mask, no darkness to hide behind. Just Richard, real and solid and utterly undone. The kiss was nothing like Callum's practiced charm. It was raw and desperate and achingly tender all at once. His mouth moved over hers like he was trying to memorize her, like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. One hand slid into her hair while the other splayed across her lower back, pulling her closer, always closer. And Susan recognized it. God help her, she recognized everything. The way his breath caught when she kissed him back. The barely restrained strength in his touch, like he was afraid she'd shatter. The taste of him, salt and steel and something darker, wilder. the way the forest fell away until there was nothing but this. His mouth on hers, his heart against her palm, the soul-deep rightness of it singing through her veins. It was him, had always been him. She broke away, gasping, tears streaming down her face. I knew. Somewhere inside, I knew, and I... Her voice cracked. How could you let me think it was him? Richard's forehead dropped to hers, his breathing ragged. Because I'm a selfish bastard who wanted one moment of you before duty and honor and everything else took you away. His thumb brushed away her tears with devastating gentleness. Because I've loved you in silence for so long, I forgot how to do anything else. Then stop being silent. Susan fisted her hands in his jacket, holding him there. Stop hiding. Stop protecting me from the one thing I actually want. His eyes blazed. And what do you want, Susan? You, she whispered. I want you. Chapter 7. They had barely made it back to the manor when Callum found them. Susan's dress was torn from the fall, leaves caught in her hair, and Richard's hand still rested possessively at the small of her back. There was no hiding what had shifted between them. Callum leaned against the stable doorway, all golden perfection and vicious amusement, but his eyes were cold as winter stone. How touching! His smile could have drawn blood. The beast finally claims his prize. Tell me, brother, did you confess before or after you played hero? I do hope you timed it well. Richard went very still beside her, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. Careful, Callum. Careful. Callum laughed, pushing off the doorframe. You lecture me about caution when you've been rutting after her like some feral animal for years. He turned that cutting smile on Susan. Did he tell you the truth, darling, that I never wanted you at all? The words hit like a physical blow. Susan's breath caught. You were bait, Callum continued, circling them with predatory grace. Pretty desperate little bait to draw out my honorable brother's weakness, to prove he's not fit to inherit anything, not the throne, not father's respect, just a scarred dog playing at being human. His eyes glittered with malice. And it worked beautifully. Enough. Richard's voice dropped to something subterranean, dangerous. Oh, I'm just getting started. Callum stepped closer, invading the space between them. You want her, fine, but you'll have to choose, brother, the woman or the crown, because I won't let you have both. I'll make sure father knows exactly what kind of man you are. The kind who steals kisses in gardens, who compromises innocent wards, who lets base instinct override duty. You forget yourself. The temperature in the stable seemed to drop. Richard's hand fell away from Susan's back as he moved forward, and she suddenly understood what the stories meant when they called him a monster. Power rolled off him in waves, not metaphorical power, but something real and primal that made the horses scream and press against their stalls. His eyes had gone dark, storm grey, swallowed by something ancient and utterly merciless. I am the Alpha. Each word resonated with barely leashed violence. You exist because I allow it. You scheme because I've been patient, but touch her again, threaten her again, and I will show you exactly what I am beneath the scars and silence. Callum stumbled back, his pretty face draining of colour. For the first time in his pampered life, he looked genuinely afraid. This isn't over, he managed, voice shaking. No, Richard's smile was a terrible thing. It's just beginning, and you've already lost. Chapter 8. The great hall blazed with candlelight and barely concealed malice. Every noble house in the kingdom had assembled to witness the coronation, their jewels glittering like weapons as they whispered behind fans and gloved hands. Susan could feel their stares like needles against her skin. She wore midnight blue silk, Richard's colour, and entered on his arm instead of trailing behind with the other ladies. The audacity of it sent shockwaves through the assembled court. "He's mad," someone hissed, "bringing his father's ward like she's already queen." The scarred beast finally shows his true nature. Richard's hand tightened fractionally on hers, the only sign he'd heard. His face remained carved from stone as they walked the gauntlet of scandal toward the dais where his father waited, crown gleaming in the firelight. Callum stood to the king's right, resplendent in gold and white, his smile sharp enough to cut. But there was fear beneath the malice now, carefully hidden. He'd already lost, and they both knew it. The king's eyes narrowed as they approached. "Richard, you forget yourself. The girl has no place at your side during such a ceremony." "Then I have no place here either, father." Richard's voice carried across the suddenly silent hall. "Susan is my chosen mate. Where I go, she goes. If the crown demands otherwise, give it to Callum. We both know he's been plotting for it anyway." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Susan's heart hammered against her ribs. "You would throw away your birthright." The king's face flushed with fury. "For a penniless orphan? I would burn the kingdom to ash before I let her go." Richard said it calmly, like commenting on the weather, and the hall erupted. That's when Susan saw them. 3 men in servants' livery, moving through the chaos with purpose, their hands disappearing into their coats. Her eyes caught the glint of steel, and recognition slammed into her. The same calculated cruelty she'd seen in Vivian's smile when the horse bolted. "Richard." She didn't get the warning out before the first blade flew. Richard moved with inhuman speed, yanking her behind him as the dagger embedded itself in his shoulder instead of her throat. The second assassin lunged from the crowd, but Richard caught his wrist mid-strike, the crack of breaking bone audible even over the screaming. Then the alpha truly emerged. Power exploded outward like a shockwave. The third assassin's blade shattered in his hand. Richard's eyes had gone completely black, ancient and merciless, and when he roared, the windows rattled in their frames. The assassins fell to their knees, compelled by something beyond mortal understanding. Even the king stepped back, pale with shock. Vivian tried to run. She made it 3 steps before Richard's voice, layered with power and absolute authority, stopped her cold. "Kneel." She collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Chapter 9. The assassins' blades gleamed in the firelight, more of them emerging from the panicked crowd than Susan had first seen. 6, 8, a dozen hired killers converging on Richard while he stood, bleeding, his power holding Vivian frozen but leaving him exposed. They were going to kill him. The realization cut through Susan's fear like lightning through stone. No. The word erupted from somewhere primal and absolute. Her hands moved without conscious thought, reaching toward Richard as the assassins closed in, and something inside her chest cracked open like an egg. Fire poured from her palms, but not the wild, destructive flames of a hearth or battlefield. This fire was alive, golden white and burning with purpose. It roared past Richard without singeing a thread of his clothing, wrapping around him like a lover's embrace, before exploding outward in a wave of devastating heat. The assassins screamed. Their blades melted in their hands. The flames consumed them with surgical precision, turning men to ash while leaving the marble floor untouched, the tapestries unsinged, the innocent nobles cowering but unharmed. Susan stood at the center of it all, her midnight blue silk now, wreathed in flames that danced across her skin like living things, her hair lifted in a wind that existed only for her, and when she opened her eyes, they blazed gold as molten sun. The great hall fell utterly silent. "Impossible," the king breathed. "The Phoenix bloodline died out 3 generations ago." "Clearly not." Richard's voice cut through the shock, rough with awe and something fiercer. The wound in his shoulder was already closing, his alpha healing accelerated by the flames still curling protectively around him. "Susan?" She looked at her hands, at the fire still flickering across her fingers, and felt the truth settle into her bones like coming home. All those years of feeling powerless, of being shuttled from house to house after her parents died, of thinking herself nothing more than a burden. "My mother," she whispered. "She made my father promise never to tell, to keep me hidden until the power woke, or not at all." The flames pulsed brighter. They died protecting the secret. Callum had gone white as snow. Vivian sobbed on the floor, the fire having stopped mere inches from her expensive shoes. The assembled nobility stared with expressions ranging from terror to religious awe. The king recovered first, political instinct overriding shock. The Phoenix Queen and the Alpha King. His voice carried the weight of prophecy. The legends spoke of such a union, a pairing that would either save the kingdom or burn it to the ground. Richard crossed to Susan through the dying flames, taking her burning hands in his scarred ones without flinching. The fire recognized him, welcomed him, wreathed them both in light. "I know which one I choose," he said, and kissed her as the court watched their world reshape itself around them. Did you enjoy Richard and Susan's story? If their journey from forbidden longing to fated love captured your heart, I'd love to hear from you. What happens next? The Alpha King and his Phoenix Queen have claimed each other, but ruling a kingdom that feared them both will be their greatest challenge yet. Vivian's schemes may be ended, but what other enemies lurk in the shadows? And can a love born in secrecy survive the harsh light of the crown? Leave a comment below and tell me, which moment made your heart race the fastest? Do you want to see more of Richard and Susan's story? Should Callum get a redemption arc? Or does he deserve his downfall? If you loved this tale of the scarred Alpha and his flame-wielding mate, please share it with fellow romance readers who crave forbidden love that defies duty, brooding heroes with devastating confessions, heroines who discover they're more powerful than they ever dreamed, the perfect blend of passion, danger, and destiny. Your support means everything. Thank you for reading Richard and Susan's story. Until the next tale, stay wild, stay romantic,